6 million years ago, the African continent was a landscape in transition. Forests were thinning. Grasslands were spreading. Climate cycles were fluctuating more than ever before. For the primates living in this changing environment, survival meant adaptation. Some species remained in the safety of the trees. Others began to explore a different strategy, one that involved standing, upright and walking on two legs. Among these early species was a hominin known today as a tuganensis. The fossils of this primate were discovered in the Tugan Hills of Kenya. They date back to around 6 million years ago, making them among the oldest known human ancestors. Although Hominins still possessed many features suited for tree climbing, its thigh bone structure shows early adaptations for upright walking, what scientists call facultative bipedalism. Bipedalism did not emerge overnight. It was not a sudden event, but a gradual shift over hundreds of thousands of years. Anatomical changes were subtle. Pelvis began to rotate slightly. The spine developed a gentle curve, feet flattened. To walk upright, the body had to rebalance itself entirely. But the trade-offs were significant. Standing upright meant a clearer field of vision across open landscapes. It allowed hands to be freed from locomotion, opening the door to new behaviors like carrying, holding, or perhaps even gesturing. Walking on two legs was more energy efficient over long distances compared to knuckle walking or moving quadrupedally. In a world where food and water sources could be widely spaced apart, this efficiency may have proved vital. The move toward bipedalism was not universal among primates. Many continued to thrive in arboreal environments. But for some hominins, particularly those living in regions where forests met savannas, upright walking offered specific advantages. It wasn't necessarily superior, it was situational. For some populations, it meant survival. There were risks, of course. Bipedal creatures are slower at sprinting than quadrupeds, are more vulnerable to certain injuries. Their newborns are more dependent and take longer to mature. But evolution is a process of trade-offs. What may seem disadvantageous in one context may prove critical in another. As these early hominins explored more open environments, their daily lives began to change. Food acquisition required greater mobility. Scavenging opportunities increased with range. Seasonal movement patterns likely became more common. And the social structures of early groups may have adapted as well, moving from arboreal clusters to small, mobile ground-based communities. Fossil sites from East Africa provide evidence of multiple hominin species during this time. Tuganensis is one of the earliest. Others, like Sahelanthropus chidensis and Ardipithecus, also appear in the fossil record within a few 100,000 years. These species represent a branching pattern, not a straight line. Evolution, even in its early stages, was already experimenting with form and function. Each of these hominins carried traits that suggest varying degrees of upright walking. Some retained long arms and curved fingers for climbing. Others began to develop stronger lower limbs for walking. There was no clear boundary between tree dweller and ground walker. It's just a slow shift along a spectrum. The environmental pressures driving these changes were complex. Geological records show that rainfall patterns in East Africa became more seasonal during this time. With that came changes in vegetation, animal populations, and resource distribution. Open woodlands and grasslands began to dominate areas that were once thick forest. To adapt, early hominins may have foraged in more exposed areas, used tree cover selectively, and traveled farther each day. Standing upright offered the ability to see over tall grass, to monitor the approach of predators, or to track distant movement. In this context, upright walking was not a sign of progress, it was a response to necessity. We often view standing up as the beginning of becoming human. But at this stage, these creatures were not yet human in the modern sense. They did not make fire. They did not speak complex language. They did not build tools, at least, not ones that survive in the fossil record. What they did do was move differently. And in that movement was the seed of something new. An upright gait affects more than locomotion. It places different demands on the nervous system. Balance becomes more complex. Visual orientation shifts. The relationship between the brain, the body, and the environment becomes more dynamic. Over time, these pressures may have influenced brain development, hand-eye coordination, and social interaction. By walking upright, early hominins became more visible to each other. Gestures may have become more prominent. Nonverbal communication could have evolved in new ways. All these are speculative ideas, but they help paint a picture of how one anatomical change can ripple through many layers of behavior. The fossil record during this era remains incomplete. Gaps exist. Bones are rare and scattered. But each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. A femur here, a jawbone there. Bits of spine, pelvis, or foot. Together, they reveal a slow shift in posture, motion, and lifestyle. By the end of this first phase, roughly between 6 and 5 million years ago, a few hominin species had begun to make bipedalism their primary form of movement. The shift was underway. It would not be reversed. Future species would carry this trait forward and refine it in time. Bipedal walking would lead to new challenges and new opportunities. It would change how humans hunted, how they gathered, and eventually how they thought. But for now, 6 million years ago, it was just beginning. The emergence of upright walking was not the final destination. It was the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would eventually lead to modern humans. But between 6 and 4 million years ago, that path remained full of experimentation, extinction, and slow anatomical transformation. After Orin, Tuganensis, another important genus, appeared, Ardipithecus. 2 species from this genus, Ardipithecus cadaba and Ardipithecus hermetus, provide further insight into the transition between tree-dwelling apes and fully bipedal hominins. Ardipithecus hermetus, which lived around 4.4 million years ago, displayed a fascinating blend of traits. Its pelvis and foot bones indicate that it could walk upright, but also had a grasping big toe, ideal for climbing. Its hands suggest that it was not adapted to knuckle walking like modern chimpanzees, but rather moved through trees in a different way. In short, Ardipithecus was a species caught in between two worlds, the forest canopy and the open ground. Walking upright did not mean abandoning the trees completely. For many early hominins, the two environments were used in combination. Sleeping in trees could offer protection at night, while walking on 2 legs allowed for exploration and foraging during the day. It was a dual survival strategy, flexible and responsive to a shifting landscape. Over the next million years, Africa's climate continued to oscillate between wet and dry periods. These cycles placed pressure on ecosystems, reshaping the environments where early hominins lived. Species that couldn't adapt to the changing availability of food and shelter eventually disappeared. Others adjusted their behaviors, body forms, or diets to survive. The fossil record shows a growing diversity of hominin species during this time. Evolution does not proceed in a single line. Instead, it branches out like a tree with multiple species existing at the same time, experimenting with different ways of living. Some of these species began to show further refinements in bipedal locomotion. The pelvis became shorter and wider, supporting the internal organs more effectively. The spine developed a more pronounced S-curve, helping maintain balance. Leg bones grew longer, increasing stride length and walking efficiency. Asterisk. These changes were not cosmetic. They were functional. A more efficient walking style meant that hominins could travel farther without using as much energy. This would have been important for foraging, migration, and potentially even group cohesion. As bands of individuals moved together in search of resources, with upright walking came changes to the hands. As the upper limbs were no longer needed for walking, they became available for other tasks. The hands of early hominins began to evolve greater dexterity. While tool use likely came later, the foundation was being set. The thumb grew stronger and more mobile. Finger joints became more capable of precise movement. Bipedalism didn't just reshape bones, it reshaped behavior. Standing on 2 legs allowed early hominins to carry objects across distances, food, sticks, perhaps even infants. It opened the door to more complex social behavior. allowing individuals to share and transport resources, contributing to group survival. The face and skull were also changing. As hominins spent more time upright, the position of the skull shifted. The hole where the spine connects, the foramen magnum, moved underneath the skull rather than toward the back. This allowed for better balance and head control while walking. These anatomical adjustments were small in any one generation, but over hundreds of thousands of years, they added up to something significant. The physical form of hominins was slowly diverging from their primate cousins. They were not yet human, but they were no longer simply ape. We still know little about the daily lives of these early bipedal species. Fossil evidence is fragmentary. No complete skeletons survive from this period. Most of what we understand comes from isolated bones, teeth, and comparative anatomy. But even from these remnants, scientists can infer certain aspects of their world. For example, the wear patterns on teeth tell us that many early hominins had flexible diets. They ate fruits, seeds, roots, and possibly small insects or animals. Their digestive systems had to handle a range of plant material, some soft, some tough, depending on the season and environment. This flexibility likely helped them survive environmental shifts. It also meant they could explore a variety of habitats, forest edges, woodland patches, savanna openings. The ability to stand upright gave them access to a wider range of food sources, while their retained climbing skills allowed for retreat to safety when needed. Social behavior, while largely speculative, was likely evolving too. Living in groups provided protection against predators and improved chances of raising offspring. Grooming, vocalizations, and facial expressions would have played a role in communication and bonding long before the emergence of language. As populations expanded into new areas, some groups became isolated from one another. Over time, this geographic separation allowed for further evolutionary divergence. Some lineages would go extinct, while others would carry traits forward that became foundational for future species like Australopithecus. By around 4.2 million years ago, Australopithecus anamensis appears in the fossil record. This species shows even stronger adaptations for bipedalism, suggesting that the shift to upright walking was now more complete. But the story of Australopithecus belongs to the next chapter. For now, as we look back to 6 million years ago, we see the beginnings of an extraordinary transformation, not in tools, not in speech, not in culture, right, but in posture, in the decision driven by survival, to walk on two legs. That step changed everything, and it would set the stage for the long and complicated evolution of our species.